Hi everyone. Today we are going to be talking about deaf-blindness. So, the federal definition of deaf-blindness states that deaf-blindness means concomitant hearing and vision impairments, the combination of which causes severe communication and other developmental and educational needs that they cannot be accommodated in special education programs solely for children with deafness or solely for children with blindness. Deaf-blindness affects two of a learner's three distance senses, which are vision, hearing, and smell. So deaf-blindness requires the uses of impact senses, which are taste, touch, and kinesthetic, for the individual to gather information about their external environment. Something that is extremely important about deafblindness is that there are varying degrees of it. So not everyone who is deafblind is completely deaf and completely blind. There are varying degrees. Learners have varying degrees of vision and hearing. So there are a large range of sensory impairments included in the category of deafblind. There are four categories of deafblindness. The first is totally deaf and totally blind. The second is totally deaf but still able to use vision to some extent. The third is totally blind but still able to use hearing to some extent. And the fourth is able to use some hearing and some vision to some extent. The onset of sensory loss. The time of onset of each sensory loss is of great importance for individuals with deafblindness. There are some terms that are used in the deafblindness community about onset of sensory loss. Congenital impairment refers to a loss that is present at birth. Adventitious loss is an impairment that develops some point after the perinatal period. So congenital impairment typically has a more pervasive effect on a child's development and future learning rather than adventitious impairments. And it makes sense if a child is born without hearing, they will never get to experience any sounds on their own. And if a child loses their hearing at age 10, say, then they will have all those hearings memories stored in their brain from what they've heard for the past 10 years. The timing in which an individual loses a particular sensory ability is critical. Timing will determine whether or not the individual maintains visual imaging of boundaries, people, and recollection of sound. Defining features. There are many different causes of deafblindness, but about 50% of people in the deafblind community have Usher syndrome. Usher syndrome is a genetic condition in which a person is deaf or hard of hearing or with normal hearing and loses his or her vision later in life. There are three different categories of Usher syndrome. Usher syndrome 1 is when an individual is born deaf and loses vision in their teenage years. Usher syndrome 2 is when an individual is born hard of hearing and loses vision later in life. Usher syndrome 3 is when an individual is usually born with normal vision and hearing or with a mild hearing loss, and then they begin to lose both senses later on in their lives. Other common causes of deafblindness include birth trauma, optic nerve atrophy, cataracts, glaucoma, macular degeneration, or diabetic retinopathy. Other causes may be from accident or illness, and the causes of deafblindness may be hereditary or associated with prenatal, perinatal, or postnatal conditions. And premature infants are at a much higher risk of developing a sensory loss than are full-term infants. So there is various terminology that is used to describe the vision impairments that individuals have with deafblindness. As we said before, vision can occur in varying degrees, so it is important to know these different terms. Low vision refers to a significant vision loss, but implies that the individual does have some vision that he or she is able to use in daily life. Moderate low vision is a visual acuity of 20/70 in the better eye with corrective lenses. Light perception is the individual's ability to differentiate between lightness and darkness. And individuals who do not have light perception are considered in total blindness. Then there is also terminology that is describing hearing, which is also really important to know. Sound is measured in decibels, dB, which are loudness or intensity, and hertz, Hz, which are frequency or pitch. The normal range of hearing is within 0 to 25 decibels. So a mild loss would be considered 26 to 40 decibels. A moderate loss would be considered 41 to 55 decibels. A moderate to severe loss would be considered 56 to 70 decibels. A severe loss would be considered 71 to 90 decibels. And a profound loss is greater than 90 decibels. Individuals are considered totally deaf when their hearing loss is in the profound range. So anything 90 or above is considered totally deaf. And below a hearing loss of 90 decibels, an individual is considered hearing impaired or hard of hearing. Incidence. The definition of deafblindness varies greatly from person to person, so it is often difficult to find an exact number of the deafblind population. I was able to find a statistic from 2007 and 2008 from the annual survey of deaf and hard of hearing children and youth, which found that there are approximately 1,718 children in the nation that are classified as either deafblind or deaf with visual impairments. And deafblind students make up about 5.4% of students nationwide. Manifestation in the educational realm. So there are general characteristics of learners with deafblindness that are typically seen in the classroom setting. Deafblindness is usually described as a disability of information gathering. Since these individuals have sensory impairments, it is often difficult for them to gather information about their external environments because they do not have their senses of sight and hearing to help them. So some characteristics exhibited by individuals with deafblindness are difficulty establishing and maintaining relationships with others, feelings of vulnerability, difficulty developing skills for communicating with others in a meaningful way, difficulty establishing object permanence, delayed understanding that there are consequences to actions, unusual response to stimuli through impact senses, which it would be touch, difficulty interacting with the environment, and delayed motor skills such as crawling and reaching. As you can see, all of these characteristics have to do with the external environment, so individuals who are deafblind have a little bit more difficult time with these certain things. Assessment. An accurate assessment of an individual's vision and hearing is critical in determining the educational interventions necessary for that student. Because deafblind students are not all the same, it is very critical that a correct assessment is done in order to have an educational plan specific to that child's needs. An ophthalmologist will conduct a medical evaluation for vision. In addition to the medical evaluation, they also conduct a functional vision assessment, which is where information is gathered and how that individual uses vision in his or her daily life. So not only are they looking at the medical aspect of it, but how this individual is actually using their vision to their benefit in their own lives. And then additionally, a hearing assessment will also be administered, which is very similar. An audiologist will conduct a medical evaluation for hearing loss, and then they will also conduct a functional hearing assessment, which also provides them with some more information about how this individual is using the hearing that they have in their daily lives and how they are utilizing that hearing. Challenges. Communication is a very large challenge for the deafblind individual. Others in the environment of the student who is deafblind must always include them what is happening all around them in the external environment so they do not feel isolated. The largest challenge for parents, teachers, and caregivers is communicating meaningfully with the child who is deafblind. Children who are deafblind will often need to use their sense of touch to establish a conversation with someone else. Deafblind children often have very low response times when responding in a conversation, so because they do not have their full range of sight and hearing senses, they might be a little bit more delayed in conversation with the appropriate gaps between sentences and responding with others. So patience is really key when dealing with the types of students. Parents, teachers, and caregivers need to make sure that they are very patient when waiting for a child to respond to them. A child who is deafblind also requires a routine of meaningful activities, and this is to help them make the world more predictable since, again, they are lacking in those sensory impairments that most people have access to. Their world is very unpredictable and they never know what is going to happen, so establishing meaningful activities would really help them. An example I read about was when it is time to go out for lunch because they can't hear the bell or see other students getting ready for lunch, maybe their instructor or caregiver will tap them with a certain object each day. So they know that every time they feel that object, it is time to go to lunch. And that is a way to let them know of what time it is and what they're supposed to be doing at that time. Social interactions. Observations of deafblind students have found that deafblind students mainly communicate with other adults in the classroom, such as teachers and paraprofessionals, rather than their non-disabled peers. For student interaction to occur, accommodations should be put in place. Research has found that an example of an accommodation that is successful is assigning a peer to the deafblind student to help them with different activities. And research has also found that the non-disabled helpers also interact with the deafblind student during free time and recess. So not only when they're supposed to be helping them, but they actually become friends when they have free time during school. Providing assistance. From birth until age 3, deafblind children are eligible for early intervention services under the Infants and Toddler with Disabilities program of IDEA. These early intervention services are designed to address the child's developmental and learning needs. These services are either provided free or on a cost scale depending on the family's income level. When the deafblind child reaches the age of 3, then they are eligible to transition into the special education services of Part B of IDEA. Even if a deafblind child is not in school yet because of their age, if they're not old enough to be in a public school, then they are still eligible to receive these special education services and resources. Teaching strategies and modifications. Children with deafblindness have very unique educational needs, and the deafblind child only learns from doing things, not from seeing or hearing them. So for that reason, small group and individual instruction are more valuable to the deafblind child than large group instruction. The deafblind child may also have a difficult time establishing trust with a caregiver or instructor, so it is very important for the instructor to take time to bond with the deafblind child and to evaluate the student's responses to that. The deafblind child must always feel safe in his or her environment, and if the child does not feel safe, then they are less likely to move around and explore the classroom. They're more likely to stay in their seats and not really do anything. The educational focus for a deafblind child should be on developing interactions and routines for expanding the frequency of communication. And these are my references. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.